Exodus chapter 18 is where we're going to be. I'm going to make it easy for you again, and we're going to put it on the screens. It says the next day, so what's happening here is that Moses is leading Israel, and it gets too big for him to handle. So it says the next day Moses sat to judge the people. Really cool job. And the people stood around Moses from morning until evening. When Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, a great name, saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, "What is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone? And all the people stand around you from morning until evening." And Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God." He said they want to know what God has to say, and so they come to me. When they have a dispute, when they have a problem, they come to me. And I decide between one person and another, and I make them know the statutes of God and his laws. Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, says to him, "What you're doing is not good. You and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you. You are not able to do it alone. Now obey my voice. I will give you advice, and God be with you. You shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God. And you shall warn them about the statutes and the laws, and make them know the way in which they must walk and what they must do. Moreover, look for able men and women from all the people, men and women who fear God, who are trustworthy, who hate a bribe, and place such men and women over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And let them judge the people at all times. Every great matter they shall bring to you, but any small matter they shall decide themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this, God will direct you, and you will be able to endure, and all this people will also go to their place in peace." So Moses listened to the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he had said. So I want to talk to you about this idea that this is the first time we see in the Bible this idea of holy delegation. So part of, I think, what's important for us as a Lakeway family is to always be able to tell our story, to tell who we're about, to tell what we do, to tell how we started. I know a lot of you in this room were here from the beginning, but one of the ways I love to tell our story is that we're a story of leftovers. So we started on a leftover night of the week. I'm asked all the time, why on earth did you do worship on a Thursday night? I tell them, really, it was a process of elimination. Sunday night, our space was filled with youth. Nobody wants to go to church on a Monday. Tuesday night in College Station, Texas, for a lot of Christians, is breakaway. Wednesday night, like tonight, we have church stuff going on everywhere. That leaves us Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Sunday in College Station, Texas, is not as sacred as Saturday. Think about that for a moment. I ain't going toe-to-toe with Texas A&M football and winning, ever, period. I wouldn't show up to preach, let's be honest. So that leaves us with, Thursday, Friday. I don't want to be here on a Friday night. Maybe you do. But that was left over on Thursday. It's actually interesting. I was listening to a podcast earlier this week that talked about the 4 church trends that this church leader sees happening in 2020. One of those was that they're going to build, that churches will build more gathering space than worship space, which we're doing. But also one of the trends was that he says he sees more and more churches moving towards a midweek service, with, in 2020, Thursday night being the most popular night of the week. Ahead of the curve. That's right. Setting trends, yeah. But we picked a leftover night of the week. We picked a leftover space, the youth room. It's actually an incredible space, but we call it leftover. The first question when I pitched this idea to my higher-ups is they said, well, how much money do you need? Good question. And I gave them a amount. I said, I need some T-shirts, and I need some flags, and I need a few other things here and there. And they said, well, we've got this leftover budget money. Why don't you just use that? So then the night of Lakeway, our very first just at 2 years ago, our very first service. I'm running around, I'm getting things ready, and I had all the communion elements, and I realized that we did not have a place to put the communion elements. And so I start searching this campus high and low. I'm ending up in a choir closet amongst all of the old choir dusty stuff, and I find a desk. And I took it around to James, our music minister, and a couple others. I said, hey, is anybody using this? They said, no, I've never seen that thing. I said, great, this is our altar. All right, so I dust the thing off, and I turn this leftover desk into our very first altar. It's a story of leftovers in what we use, but it's also a story of leftovers in who we reach. So the reason we started a midweek service in the first place was to reach the people that had a difficult time coming to church on Sunday mornings. So I'm thinking in particular of two stories that are very near and dear to my heart. One is the very first person we baptized on Thursday night, Roy Landers. He actually texted me today. Still a member of our community. But what he was doing, he had never gone to church. And he, in this season of his life, couldn't because he was driving up to Dallas every weekend to work at the airport. And so his family heard about this Thursday night thing, and he said, that sounds great. And about 3 or 4 weeks in, we baptized him. The second story is walking in right now. Welcome, Lindsay. Lindsay is another story of my favorite Lakeway leftovers. So many of you probably know that Lindsay has been a member of our church for a decade? Something like that, a while.
Lily was born in 2014, so 2012, 2013.
Okay, so getting close up on a decade. But 2 or 3 years ago, when did you move over to First Watch?
It's been 3 years.
3 years. 3 years ago, Lindsay moved over to First Watch. And First Watch is brunch. And brunch happens on Sunday mornings. And so we'd see Lindsay faithfully every Wednesday night, but she was struggling because she couldn't make it to church on Sunday mornings because she was working. And so we said, well, why don't we, reach people like Lindsay, reach people like Roy, and start a Thursday night service. And these were the people that we aim to reach, and it's working. But what we are now finding is that there's a lot of people in that leftover category. Right? There's a lot of people that see something attractive about what we're doing, and particularly the night of the week that we're doing it on. So that means that as our numbers climb, we're facing a similar problem that we just read about with Moses. Is that we've got more and more people coming in our doors. We're growing. We've set our attendance record 3 times already this year. Right? And what that means is that now more than ever, I need you. And we need you. And so in the second talk that we're calling the Culture Code, I want to do 2 primary things. One is I want to help you shift how you think about yourself and your interaction in our community. I want you to stop thinking yourself as a partaker and as someone who has actual buy-in, as a creator. Stop thinking yourself as a consumer and start thinking of yourself as a creator. So, what I mean by that is that with all of our leftovers, I and Austin and Zach and Catherine, we can't do it alone. We need you. Church growth experts kind of identify these different barriers in church attendance, and they kind of predict that out based off of how your church will do long term. So we're at, I'll be real honest with you, we're at a barrier right now. There are 2 barriers so we pushed through the 75 barrier. I realize that barrier, I give 100% responsibility to Austin, bringing him on, sharing responsibility, bringing someone more young and exciting than I am. That pushes past 75, where we were for about a year. Now we're sitting right at that 125 barrier. So that's been our average over these first 6 weeks. We've gone all the way up to 163, but we're hovering right about that 125, 130 range. And the church growth experts will say the number one thing to get you above that 125 is that the pastor has to do less. That means I have to do less. I, like Moses, need to be able to put you in charge. And I want to help you see that tonight. So as Methodists, we are part of the Protestant movement. So the Protestant church split away from the Catholic church, if you remember back to your high school history class. And that happened for a whole lot of different reasons. But one of the main movers in that was that Martin Luther believed in this concept called the priesthood of all believers. You heard this before? priesthood of all believers. And what Luther saw in his time with the Roman Catholic Church is that there was this very strict hierarchy between the priest and the laity, between the clergy and the regular folk. So the priests were the ones who could read the Bible, who could perform Mass, who really had the relationship with God, and everything happened through them. And what Luther came to say is look, I don't really see much of a difference scripturally between somebody called to preach and preside over the elements and someone who's not. He said, we're all in this together long before High School Musical came out, right? He said, this is all, that was. I know when Sydney's giving me just a shake of the head no that it's bad. She's usually cracking up at all of my jokes. That was a lie. She doesn't laugh at anything. I'm a huge priesthood of all believers guy. It's still kind of weird being in a pastoral role and people text me and ask for prayers, and I love that, and I love praying. But I don't believe that my prayers have any power that yours don't. I don't believe that God listens to me more than he listens to you. I don't believe there's anything particularly special about my spiritual walk. I know that there are people in here that know more about the Bible, that have stronger prayer lives, that have done way more missionary and evangelistic activities than I have done. I know in this room that is true. I just have a gift that's a little bit different from yours. But what that means is that Lakeway is not Daniel's, it's not Zach's, it's not Austin, it's ours. And that means that you have a role to play. That it's not just me, it's we need you. Another way to think about it is that you have the opportunity to be a part of someone's salvation story. You have the opportunity to be a part of someone's salvation story. We have people who do not believe in Jesus walk into our doors every Thursday night. And I know a lot of you have done a great job being a part of our greeting team, being a part of our communion serving team. But I want you to elevate to think about what you can do in those moments, more than just opening the door and more than just showing them a seat. You can become a part of their salvation story by the way you welcome, by the way you love, listen to this, by the way you pastor them. Don't think of yourself as just a volunteer. When people walk in, you can be their pastor. So let me just tell you practically kind of where we're going, is that in season 2, Austin's been working on a new system for our volunteer structure. Right now, it's for the past probably 6 months or so, it's been hard to get people to volunteer. It's been pulling teeth at times. That's an us problem, that's a you problem, that's a we problem. And we realize that we have to be able to make volunteering attractive, make it something different, make it something worthwhile, as opposed to just holding doors. That's part of the reason why we're having this conversation anyway. So be ready in season 2. We're going to kind of double down on how we do volunteering. It's not just going to be show up once a month. It's going to be a lot more involved. We're going to build community around the volunteering. We're going to be changing up language quite a bit as well. So be ready for all that, because we really believe that we don't need to be a church with servants, but we need to be a church of servants. See the difference there? I think every church in America is a church with servants. You have the core group, and then as most organizations go, 20% of the people do 80% of the work. Right? And you can survive like that. You can get by like that. But I want us to be a church that 100% of the people do 100% of the work. And that means that we're not a church that just a few people serve. We're not a church with servants. We are a church of servants. To be marked by how we lead out in servant leadership, like we talked about last week, in the way of Jesus. Sociologists will say that if you want to change a culture, which around particularly volunteering is something that we need to do, to change the culture, you've got to get 16% of your people on board. If 16% of your people will start serving, acting, speaking in a different way, it'll change the culture. Right? Let me go ahead and tell you, you are the 16%. You're the folks willing to take out a Wednesday night for 4 weeks to come and learn about leadership and learn about how we want to act as Lakeway. They say if 16% of the people in a room start quacking like a duck, everyone will start quacking like a duck. That means that if you start leading out and you start seeing yourself as more than just a volunteer, but as a priest, as a pastor, as someone who can be a part of someone's salvation story by the way you act, if you see yourself like that, then we're going to see the whole atmosphere change. And I can't do that by myself. I need you, and we need you. I've been to a lot of big churches in my day. If I ever have an opportunity to be in a city, I always try to look up the biggest church and just go. And time after time, it used to confuse me, but now I love it. I love going to these big, huge mega churches, big, huge auditoriums, big, bright, airy, powerful music. And then I love it nothing more than when the preacher is just bad. Or maybe not bad, but like not blowing away. Like a B- sermon, kind of like what I preach most of the time. Just hearing that, and I used to walk away thinking, man, that guy was bad. Like, what's going on here? But what I found is that I hope one day someone walks away from Lakeway and says, man, that preacher was bad. How is that place so thriving? How is that place so big? How is that place so energetic? Because in all of those settings, it's not about the preacher. It's about the community. It's about the culture. It's what has been built around the preacher. Because that matters way, way more than anything I talk about for 30 minutes on a Thursday night. And at the end of the day, all I can do is lead out and help show you the way. That is up to you. The great late Peter Drucker, who was kind of a management guru, put it this way: culture eats strategy for breakfast. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Did you make that up, Larkin?
It's written on our whiteboard at work.
Is it? It's true, isn't it? Because you can strategize to the ends of the earth. But if your culture is off, nothing's going to work. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. So what that means is that I have a lot of strategy. I have a lot of dreams, a lot of vision for Lakeway. But another one of the things that the management gurus will say is that you don't rise to the level of your goals. What you fall to the level of your systems. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. What that means is I reviewed it today. I've got a document on my laptop that's called Lakeway Dreams. It will never see the light of day. And the reason for that is these dreams are ridiculous, right? They are big, hairy, audacious goals, if you know that language. They are laughable. I've told some people some of these parts, and if they don't laugh outwardly, they're laughing inwardly, right? They're crazy, but I'm going to dream that big, knowing that unless our culture, unless our systems are bringing us up to that level, we're never going to get there. And so what that means is that it can't be about my dreams. It can't be about my strategy. I cannot be the main driver in this. Period. This has to be organic. This has to be from you. So what that means is that in everything for Lakeway, I want you to take it personally. Take it personally. What that means is that when I've had people come into Lakeway and when they've been honest enough with me to tell me why they're not coming back, oftentimes it breaks my heart. Right? It's something I said. It's something that we could have adjusted a little bit. It's something that's preventing them from experiencing the community and the worship and the passion that we are building. I want you to take it personally as well. Because, again, this is not Daniel's church. This is not Christ UMC's church. This is your church. And that means if we're missing, there's going to be some people that are just going to fit in better at another church. And we can celebrate that, fine. But if we're missing on some level that prevents somebody who doesn't know Jesus from coming into our space, then it's up to you and it's up to me to do everything in our power to fix it. take it personally. So, in our remaining time together, I want to lay out the 5 expectations I have of you. The 5 expectations that I have of you. I want to be clear. These expectations are not just when you're on. So I know a lot of you will have signed up to volunteer once a month, once every 6 weeks in greeting and serving and whatever else you may be in. These are the expectations that I have of you all the time. Whether or not you're greeting, whether or not you're serving, as leaders, these are the expectations I have of you, and I hope you have of me as well. And they rhyme, so it's cute. Number one is this: be beside, not a tour guide. Be beside, not a tour guide. And what this has to do with is a principle we talked about last week, that Jesus was all about names over numbers. What that means is that when somebody comes into our space, we shouldn't just count them as a person to raise up our average worship attendance, but we ought to see them as a person with a name, with a story, with a need to encounter Jesus. And then it's our job as believers to meet them in evangelism. So evangelism in a whole lot of contexts gets a bad rap, it's a dirty word. And I think a lot of the times that's probably good. Because we have to, with everything, we talked about this in the Q&A last week, church in the future, church to reach millennials and Gen Z has to look radically different than ever before. And that means that all those terms and all those ways of reaching people that we used to use, we can take some of it, but a lot of that we're throwing out the window. So evangelism used to be, I know my first thought when I think of evangelism is that kind of typical, street evangelism, where you walk up to somebody, hey, if you were to die tonight, do you know where you'd go? Right, just like weird, uncomfortable. I guess that works sometimes, but I've never heard a testimony of someone says, yeah, I was at Walmart and this guy came up to me and, I think he threatened to kill me and then somehow I was like on my knees begging for salvation. Evangelism is either that on kind of the more extreme, conservative, I don't even know if I want to call it right-wing type church. But then the flip side of that is we don't want to get in anybody's faces at all, and so instead we're going to get in their mailbox. Right? And so the evangelism committee is all about making flyers and then sending them out, or getting the right pens, or getting the right shirts, whatever else it may be. I think a better vision for evangelism, and I've borrowed some of this from a book called Get Their Name, which is really good, simple way. Farr, Anderson, and Cotan, I think, wrote that. I can verify that later. But I've kind of added onto their definition to say that evangelism is simply this: building authentic relationships with people we don't know and people who don't know Jesus. Building authentic relationships with people we don't know who also don't know Jesus. You see how there's a mindset shift in there? That it's not transactional. It's not this one time I'm going to go out on the street corners and see how many souls I can get won. And it actually takes a connection. It's not just a one-off drop, hey, here you go, here's a track, I'm moving on. Building authentic relationships with people we don't know who don't know Jesus. Acts chapter 8 is, I'll probably preach a series on Acts 8 at one point, particularly the story on the Ethiopian eunuch. But I love this. So let's take a look. It says, now an angel of the Lord said to Philip, rise and go towards the south to the road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza. This is a desert place. And so Philip rose and he went, and there was an Ethiopian, a eunuch. If you don't know what that is, ask your parents. A court official of Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who was in charge of all her treasure. And he had come to Jerusalem to worship. And he was returning, and he was seated in his chariot. And he was reading the prophet Isaiah. So we've kind of given a background of this guy. He has some power. He's in charge a little bit. And he's coming back from Jerusalem, and he's sitting reading the prophet Isaiah. And the Spirit says to Philip, go over and join this chariot. So Philip, listening to the Spirit, a good idea, runs over to him. And he hears him reading Isaiah the prophet. And he asks, do you understand what you are reading? This is a relationship. And the Ethiopian eunuch says, how can I unless someone guides me? The biggest softball evangelistically you've ever seen. And he invited Philip to come up and sit with him. And then if you know the rest of the story, the Ethiopian eunuch says, what must I do? Philip says, be baptized in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. And so they pull the chariot over and he baptizes him. This is relationship, and this is evangelism in action. This is Philip being led by the Spirit of God to a particular person, and then sitting with that person, talking with that person, getting to know that person's story, and the person finds Jesus. This is not a one-off transactional, I'm going to put a flyer in your mailbox and hope for the best. This is real life together. The only thing I think Philip does wrong here, if I can even say that, doesn't get his name. There is so much power on a really, really practical level that if someone shows up to Lakeway for the very first time and you can get their name and you can remember it next week, I would guess that person has a 10 times higher chance of showing up. Now, you may be saying, I'm bad with names. Who would confess to that? It's all right. A lot of us in this room. That's okay. Let me challenge you on something. There is absolutely no shame. In the moment that person walks away, pull out your phone and type that name. Because I promise you, when we talk about being a part of someone's salvation story, if someone can say, I didn't know what church was, I didn't like church, but I showed up and someone that I had met the week before remembered my name and knew a part of my story, I promise you that's going to speak way louder than any message I can say from the pulpit. Get their name, get their story. That's being beside, not a tour guide. And part of that, too, is that when someone walks in, when we were a church of 60, I could easily get up and meet that person, hear their story, get to know them. Now, especially before worship, I'm all over the place. After worship, I try, but it's really, really hard. And so what I need you to do is I need you to be able to look in their eyes, to see their pain, to see that they're struggling, to see that they're confused, and step up to the plate. To say, how can I help you? Are you struggling with something? Are you dealing with something? How can I pray for you? Hey, Brian, I met you last week. This may be a weird question for you, but I just want to know, how can I pray for you this week? If someone knows that you are praying for them, that's how you become a part of that salvation story. Because then we believe in the power of prayer. We believe prayer isn't just meditation, but God listens, God hears, God responds. And that allows you to change someone's future just by stepping out in faith and asking that question, how can I pray for you? Get their name, look into their eyes, be beside, not a tour guide. Number 2, I told you they rhyme. Get ready. Be a solution finder, not a problem minder. Be a solution finder, not a problem minder. It is so easy to find problems in anything. In your work, in your family, with your spouse. Don't say amen if you're sitting next to them. In church. I guarantee you that somebody could sit on a Thursday night and make a list of 100 problems. It is easy to do. What's much harder to find is solutions. Problems don't do a whole lot for me, right? I fall into this trap so easily where I just list all the problems. But I want you, as our leaders, to not bring me problems, bring me solutions. Say, hey, I've noticed this, so here's what I'm going to do about it. So I'm going to pick on St. Sally for a moment. So when we started Lakeway, I mentioned earlier that one of the first questions was, how much money is this going to cost us? A good question. So I said, hey, to start up, here's what I need. And they said, great, what's your continuation cost? And I said, I don't know, bread and grape juice? And so what does Sally do? Sally doesn't even know this is a problem. We haven't even had a worship service yet, but Sally identifies a solution. Sally comes to me and says, hey, I hear you're starting this Thursday night thing. Can I bake bread for you every week? And every week for 2 years, Sally has been baking bread. Because she saw a problem coming, and instead of bringing that problem, saying, hey, it's going to be really annoying to keep bread frozen, and remember to thaw it on time, she said, I'm going to be a part of the solution. If I had 100,000 Sallys, I could build the greatest church on the face of the human history. Be a solution finder, not a problem minder. God wants more for us than just to sit around and talk about the problems. Because you can dwell on that and you can go to some dark places. If you come to me with a problem, you say, hey, we need this, chances are I'm going to say, why don't you go on ahead and set it up? Jerry knows this to be true. Jerry came to me last summer and says, hey, there's this idea that you should have summer tours just to build community around each other. And I said, great, set it up. And so she did. If you come to me with one of those, there's a good chance that I'm going to fire back. And if you're a great leader like Jerry, you're going to do it. And we're all going to be better off for it. That's seeing the solutions, not just the problems. Austin and I actually talked about this today. Again, let's get really, really practical. So there have been, I think, 3 times this year that we have run out of chairs. Guessing the chair game is a game that we have not yet mastered. I'm sure you've walked in sometime and think, man, this place is empty, and then you've walked in sometimes and say, man, I can't find a chair. We try to control that based on guessings, and we're pretty bad at it. But, so this past week, we ran out of chairs. And I had 3 super faithful people, Austin was one of them, leaders in our community, who came up to me and says, should we get more chairs? Do we need to get more chairs? The answer is yes. Right? If you see that, you see the problem, and you know the solution, I want to empower you to go and do it. Right? That's what Jethro told Moses. He says, give the people the power for all the small stuff. Now, if you say, like, Zach's voice is off today, I'm going to go unplug him, that's a different conversation. Don't do that. It's never been bad, Zach. It's always just perfect. But if you see a problem and you know the solution, do it. You have my authority. Don't ask for permission, ask for what? Forgiveness. I'm a Methodist. I'm all about grace. I will give you that grace. If you see a problem and you know the solution, just go out and do it. And that goes for Lakeway, that goes for our community, that goes just for your household, that goes for your work as well. If you stop bringing so many problems to your boss and to your coworkers, and instead you just start working on the solution, you're going to see the atmosphere start to change. You're going to see not only the atmosphere of your workplace, but you're going to see the atmosphere of your heart change as well. So I've noticed in those times where I sit around with coworkers, I know we don't just pray all the time. A lot of the times we sit around, and if we're not careful, we fall into that trap of just complaining about all kinds of stuff, talking about problems. And it's so easy to do, and I fall into it all the time. But in those moments where I intentionally say, I'm going to bring positivity to this moment, I'm going to bring solutions to this moment, I'm going to turn the problems on their side and look for those silver linings, not only does the atmosphere of the room change, but the atmosphere of my heart changes as well. That's being a solution finder, not a problem minder. Number 3. This is my favorite of all of them. Be an energy empire, not an energy vampire. Be an energy, this is not I would love to say, I made up all the other ones. This was not me. Rich Wilkerson Jr., VU Church in Miami, he always tells his people to be an energy empire, not an energy vampire. So every time you walk into a room, whether this is church on Thursday night, whether it's this room, whether it's your living room, whether it's your classroom, whatever it may be, one of 2 things is going to happen. You're either going to bring energy into that room, or you're going to suck energy away from that room. The best way I can think of it is like a church potluck. I love church potlucks. We're doing one on Sunday. A church potluck. Either you are bringing something to contribute that everybody else can enjoy, Or you are a slacker and you are a mooch and you bring nothing, and then you come and you consume, and that's less for somebody else to consume. The same goes with energy. Either you are bringing energy into a space or you are sucking energy away from that space. And I want you, particularly my leaders, to be an energy empire instead of an energy vampire. Well, what do I mean by energy? That's kind of like a weird New Age type thing. Energy is one of those things that it's hard to describe, but you can feel it. You know it when it's there. There have been, one of the first questions that Zach and I talk about every Thursday night after the service was, how was the energy? And I know that a lot of you've probably felt it. You've felt some Thursday nights that for one reason or another, the energy's not there. And there's some things that we're doing that contribute to that. We're trying to tweak that, right? The rhythm of the songs, the crispness of the transitions, the message that I'm bringing, a lot of that contributes. But a lot of that, too, is what's going on in the room. Are people engaged? Are people attentive? Are people smiling? Are people lifting their hands in worship? Are people falling asleep? Are they dozing off? Are they taking notes? All of these things contribute to the energy of the room. In other words, you control it just as much as Zach and I do. Energy, like everything else, is a we problem. And that means, too, that if you walk in sluggish, you are not the only one affected by that. If you walk in tired, if you walk in dragging, you are not the only one affected by that. If you stumble in late, if you text during worship, if you fall asleep during the sermon, which some people are going to do that. It's fine. It's late. I'm boring. It's dark. It's warm. But it's hurting us. Remember that last week we talked about how leadership is influence. And that means that someone is always watching you, particularly in worship. Right? Unless you're like me and you sit at the very, very back row, but even in the setting we had last week, we're in a kind of rotunda. Someone is watching you. So that means that your energy affects someone else because, listen to this, energy is attractive. Right? We're going to do everything short of sin to bring people who are far from Jesus to a relationship with Him. And what that means is that if we can change our energy and it's attractive, then people are going to want to be around us, and then people are going to want to be around Jesus. So Catherine, our Lakeway intern, if you haven't met her, she's been on with us for about a week right now, or about a month. Meet her. She is incredible. I met her at Impact Ministry Fair over the summer. We connected over a mutual friend, her pastor, who I used to intern with. And then she came the very first Thursday she was here. And I just kind of said, what's your story? What you got going on? Tell me about yourself. And her energy, she called herself today 90 pounds of fierce. And I think that's adequate because most of the time she walks into a room and she is the smallest person in the room. But she is a ball of energy. So much, the very first time she came to Lakeway, I texted our mutual friend, Ben Trammell, and I said, Ben, if this girl chooses our church, she's going to be on staff within a year. I knew nothing about her skill set. I knew nothing about what she was good at or bad at. I didn't know what her passions were, but I knew she had the energy that we, as the crusty old guys, need. Energy is attractive. So what that means is that we talk a lot about time management. Right? We talk a lot about how to life hack. We talked about steps in the morning last week, and time management's really important. But what I'm learning more and more is that what's more important than time management is energy management. Because if you walking into the room affects that space, affects the energy in that room, then you've got to make sure, particularly on Thursday night, you're bringing your best. Right? There's been plenty of Thursday nights where I have been completely spent, just exhausted, long week. Sometimes I'm driving in from out of town. Everything and so I know I have to bring energy. So what do? I chug my energy drink as fast as I can. Now, I want to be clear that when I say I want you to bring energy, I'm not saying make sure you show up early enough to get a cup of coffee in you. Instead, what I'm challenging you to do as our leaders is to make sure that you are managing that energy outside of Thursday night from 7 to 8. What does that mean? That means physically. That means spiritually. That means financially. That means relationally. The healthier you are individually, the healthier we are collectively. Because you're bringing all of that into the room. You're bringing all of that anxiety that you've been carrying, all that stress that you've been carrying, and sometimes that's okay, because what better place to bring that than a church? But more often than not, you need to be bringing your best. I expect that out of you as our leaders. Do I expect that out of every single person? Absolutely not. But I expect that out of you. Manage your energy, not just your time. This is why I went hunting this week. I left Sunday, hunted Monday, got back yesterday. Awful week to do that. Just a terrible week. I got a deer, so it was great in that. But just a really bad week. I had this talk mostly done. I had to finish this up. We've got church tomorrow. We've got a lot going on there. Saturday, I'm teaching a 5-hour course on the basic beliefs of Methodism. And then I'm preaching all 3 services on Sunday. Right? So what am I believe that my gifts and what I love to do, what was that?
Red Bull.
Red Bull, yes, likely. I love to preach and teach. It's life-giving for me. I love it. But it takes time because I want to bring my best. I don't want to just throw something together. So I knew that this was not going to be a good week to go, but I also knew that it wasn't just about time management, it's about energy management. So I knew that sitting in a deer stand for multiple hours on end, waiting for something to show up, I knew that driving around in a Ranger and feeding, getting ready for quail, I knew all of that was going to bring more energy to my spirit. So that yesterday, as I was driving back on the 4-hour drive from South Texas, I felt so charged and excited and ready to do what God called me to do. So, the practical application of being an energy empire instead of an energy vampire could be take a stinking vacation. The world's going to keep spinning. God calls us and tells us and makes it a law to rest on the 7th day. But for some reason, we think that we can do it and that the world's going to stop spinning if we don't work that 7th day. He's given us these rhythms. He's called us to do it, and it's so we can stay in love with Him and have the energy He's called us to breathe. Isaiah chapter 40. I love this. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint. And to him who has the might, has no might, he increases strength. Notice that God is the source of the strength. God is the source of the power. God is the source of the energy. Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like the eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not be faint. All of this says that the source of our strength, the source of our energy, the source when we are faint and weary and falling exhausted is the Lord God Almighty, who is the source of all of that. And so when we talk about energy, it's not some sort of magical New Age thing. It comes from the Lord. Where you get energy is when you're seeking after Him. And that's my expectation of you. Number 4. Be a celebrator, not a criticizer. Be a celebrator, not a criticizer. This is another expectation that I'm going to put on you as the leaders, and that is to find people to celebrate. Find people to celebrate. That means you might not know their name, you might not know their story. But again, if you go up to them and give the simplest of compliments, hey, I don't know you, I love that shirt. Could be something as simple as that. Right? Hey, I don't know your name, but I loved watching you worship, and the Lord is at work through you. hey, I just saw you, and you just have this aura, you just have this energy about you, and I love it. These simple things are going to uplift people in a world, in a culture of comparison, that we're constantly looking at other people and thinking less of ourselves. If someone we don't know comes up to us and pays us a compliment, talking about changing the atmosphere, that's a culture I want to be a part of. If I know that I can show up and be uplifted, not just by the singing and not just by the preaching, but of someone noticing me and taking time to compliment me, just even think about it. If there are very few moments where someone has done that to me, and I remember those moments, where somebody I don't know is just bold and says, hey, I love what you're doing. Be that for somebody. Is it going to be uncomfortable? Maybe. For you, not for them. They're going to appreciate it. That's being a celebrator, not a criticizer. One of the things that means for us corporately is that we've got to celebrate the wins. We've got to celebrate the wins. We celebrate when any of our teams win. We celebrate if the Aggies win. We celebrate if the Astros win, if you're one of those. We celebrate if the Cowboys ever win. We celebrate those kinds of wins, but then when it comes to church, we get in this uncomfortable spot of how do we celebrate a win? All right, that's why I'm open about our numbers. It's not all about the numbers. We talked about that last week. But I believe that as our numbers, each number represents a story and a person and a soul in need of saving. And so I'm going to celebrate what God is doing in us. I love nothing more than when we get to baptize someone out there. Those are the biggest celebrations that we have. Because I believe if God is celebrating, then we should be celebrating with him. If God is celebrating something that's happening in our midst, then we should be celebrating the wins as well. Last week, I told you, we talked about being a servant first and letting that servant attitude lead to leadership. Wow. Oh my gosh. It's good. Thanks, Austin. Servant. It's a servant right there. We talked last week about serving first and then being put in places of leadership. And I talked to you about Rachel, who was a young woman in our church who Zach had never heard sing. But she came up time after time after time. If you were here on Thursday, it was incredible. It was unreal. Like goosebumps good. And so I see that and like, she kind of snuck away after worship. I didn't get to talk to her, but by God, I'm going to see her tomorrow night and I'm going to celebrate the tar out of her. Right? Because that is the story that we're trying to instill, is show up, is serve, is have that attitude. And then when she gets up there, I would have celebrated her if she wasn't very good, but the fact that she's incredible and led people in worship in an amazing way, that's something huge to celebrate. So I hope if you didn't on Thursday, you celebrate her. Right? Become a part of her story. Let's be a community that rallies around her and just says, we love you and we appreciate all that you're doing for us. Celebrate the wins. If God is celebrating, so should we. Luke 15, you probably know the chapter well. It's the lost chapter. So it's the story of the lost coin. It's the story of the lost sheep. And then Jesus gives us this parable that we're familiar with. It's the story of the prodigal son, the lost son. If you know the story, the son asks his father for his inheritance, which is just an incredibly bold move to say, Dad, you're pretty much dead to me. Give me the stuff. And he goes to a foreign land and he wastes away all his money. And then he's eating pig slop. And he thinks to himself, my father's servants eat better than this. So why don't I go back and just beg for forgiveness and beg to be one of his servants? And so he's coming out and he arose and he came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, I just love that phrase. That the Father is like our Father, and even when we are still a long way off for us from him, this is what he does. His father saw him and felt compassion. And he ran and he embraced him and he kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. He says, I've done so many things wrong, and I've asked so much of you, and I have failed. But the father said to his servant, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring him the fatted calf and kill it. and let us eat and what?
Celebrate.
Celebrate. For this my son was dead, and he's alive again. He was lost, and now he is found. And they began to what?
Celebrate.
Celebrate. This is a picture of what happens when a lost son or a lost daughter returns to the Father. And if God is celebrating that, we should too. And I know that God is bringing lost sons and daughters to our worshiping community, to our church on Thursday nights. And when they come to a relationship with the Father, we've got to be celebrating alongside of heaven. Number 5, last one. Actually, hold on. No. Back up to there. This is kind of an aside, but I think it's important. There's a difference in straight criticism and constructive criticism. Right? So I talked about this last week, the need for feedback, that we always need to be evaluating, we always need to be getting better. I am not saying in this that you can't bring problems and you can't bring constructive criticisms, again, with potential solutions to the leadership of our community. Because we are not perfect at all. I told you could list 100 problems. Don't do it tomorrow. But you could. But I love this saying. I think we put it up here. Crow tastes better warm. Crow tastes better warm. What that means is that if you need to ask for forgiveness for somebody, go to them quickly. If you have to eat crow, do it while it's still warm. At the same time, if you've got a problem, let's call it a problem to bring to somebody, it's a lot better to do it quicker than later. Why is that? Because if you've got a problem with somebody, what's going to happen is that if you don't bring it to them, then what do? You sit and you stew and you create all of these situations of you're getting into their mind, you're trying to invent motives. If you've been married before, you do this. Bring the problem to them quickly. Crow tastes better warm, and the person that you're going to be serving the problem to, that's going to taste a lot better warm. Okay, number 5. The last one. Be a Jesus type, not a religious archetype. Be a Jesus type, not a religious archetype. So I think more and more younger generations have in their mind this vision of church. What does church mean? And I think more and more people that I talk to, it's really kind of one of two things. Here in the South, we have people that just think a preacher stands up and yells at me about my sins and makes me feel really guilty. Or people think of church as standing up, somebody stands up and reads a bunch of stuff that just seems dead and seems dry. To me, that's a religious archetype. And I think what we're called to is much more than that. We're called to be a Jesus type. What does that mean? Religion is about rules and regulations. Jesus is about relationship. Religion is about rules and regulations. Jesus is about relationship. That's why we say Lakeway family. That's an intentional word choice. Because a congregation is a bunch of people who show up to kind of listen and kind of sing and kind of do stuff. A family is relationship. One of the best compliments that someone has ever paid me, I think it was actually this last week, after we tried to do something different in church and have an interview instead of a traditional message. And someone came up after me after the service. It was the next day or the day after. And they were first-timers. I said, what'd you like? Give me some feedback. What'd you think? And they said, I loved it. It didn't feel like church at all. And they said, I'll be back next Thursday. If we break those stereotypes, if we shatter those expectations of people who are far from God, who have this image of church, and they say, I don't want to be a part of that. If we can be a community, if we can be a church, if we can be a family that shatters those expectations in everything that we do, then we're never going to be able to bring enough chairs in. I promise you. And remember, this is up to you. I can't do it alone. Zach can't do it alone. Austin can't do it alone. Catherine can't do it alone. This is your church, and that means it's your responsibility. So if you see a problem with our church, that's fine, fix it. If you see something that you want changed, change it. Another way to think about it is this: be what you want to see. Be what you want to see. If you want our church to be a certain way, if you want to see that, then you start being it. You start doing it. This is the culture code. This is who we're trying to be. This is who we're trying to raise up. It starts not with me. It starts with you. It starts with us. And it starts now. Let me pray for our time together. God, we thank you for all that you're doing through Lakeway. We celebrate alongside you with all the wonderful things and all the wonderful ways that you're moving. God, help us to be servants. Help us to grow in our capacity to bring people to you, to see ourselves as more than just volunteers who show up to serve for an hour, but as parts of people's salvation story. God, we pray for droves of people to come to encounter you for the first time, to grow in their faith of you. And God, it's not about Lakeway. It's not about Christ UMC. It's not about us. It's only about you, King Jesus. Help us to do everything in our power to bring people to you. And we pray in that mighty name of Jesus. Amen.